The camera opens on glass towers glittering under a gray Manhattan sky. A slow pan through mirrored lobbies, designer suits, and laughter that sounds expensive. Inside a private conference room on the 47th floor, a dozen executives wait around a table of polished mahogany. Their conversation buzzes with self-assurance, stock options, mergers, private jets, the rhythm of men who believe the world belongs to them. And then, in the corner of that same room, stands a man who doesn't belong, at least not in their eyes. His name is Malcolm Reed. 36 years old. Black. Brilliant. And invisible. They don't see the calm in his posture or the calculation in his silence. They don't see the decades of work behind those eyes, nights coding in basements, mornings balancing debt and dreams, the years spent proving that genius can come from Detroit's cracked sidewalks too. To them he's just the engineer. The one they'd called in to explain the system they were about to buy. The irony? They're sitting in his building pitching a merger for a company he built. But not one man in that room knows it. Not yet. Across the table, Richard Hale, CEO of a trillion-dollar conglomerate, leans back in his chair. His silver cufflinks catch the light. His smile, polite, condescending, lands on Malcolm like a verdict. "So, Mr. Reed," he says, tone dripping with practiced civility, "you're the developer, correct? The one behind the AI prototype." Malcolm nods. "Yes, sir." He doesn't add "and the founder, and the owner, and the man who made your future possible." "Not yet." Richard chuckles softly. "Good. Because we'd like to understand how it works, in plain English if possible." The room laughs. A few smirks. And just like that, the power dynamic is set. They think they've already won. But what they don't know is that this meeting, this room, this company, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the man they just dismissed. They thought he was just the tech guy, another quiet black engineer in the corner of the boardroom. But when they laughed at his ideas, he didn't shout. He smiled. Because in 10 minutes, every man at that table would realize they didn't just work with him. They worked for him. The camera opens on glass towers glittering under a gray Manhattan sky. A slow pan through mirrored lobbies, designer suits, and laughter that sounds expensive. Inside a private conference room on the 47th floor, a dozen executives wait around a table of polished mahogany. Their conversation buzzes with self-assurance, stock options, mergers, private jets, the rhythm of men who believe the world belongs to them. And then, in the corner of that same room, stands a man who doesn't belong, at least not in their eyes. His name is Malcolm Reed. 36 years old. Black. Brilliant. Invisible. They don't see the calm in his posture or the calculation in his silence. They don't see the decades of work behind those eyes, nights coding in basements, mornings balancing debt and dreams, the years spent proving that genius can come from Detroit's cracked sidewalks too. To them he's just the engineer. The one they'd called in to explain the system they were about to buy. The irony? They're sitting in his building pitching a merger for a company he built. But not one man in that room knows it. Across the table, Richard Hale, CEO of a trillion-dollar conglomerate, leans back in his chair. His silver cufflinks catch the light. His smile, polite, condescending, lands on Malcolm like a verdict. "So, Mr. Reed," he says, tone dripping with practiced civility, "you're the developer, correct? The one behind the AI prototype." Malcolm nods. "Yes, sir." He doesn't add "and the founder, and the owner, and the man who made your future possible." "Not yet." Richard chuckles softly. "Good. Because we'd like to understand how it works, in plain English if possible." The room laughs. A few smirks. And just like that, the power dynamic is set. They think they've already won. But what they don't know is that this meeting, this room, this company, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the man they just dismissed. The projector hums. Charts glow across the glass wall. Revenue projections, product rollouts, global takeovers. Malcolm's code, his creation, is reduced to bullet points and buzzwords. Predictive human AI, the slides read. But to Richard's team, it's just another acquisition, another trophy. Malcolm's voice is calm as he explains the architecture. The neural mapping, the ethics safeguards, the human behavior model that could transform healthcare. But halfway through his sentence, one executive interrupts. "Hold up, you're saying you designed all that?" His tone drips disbelief like Malcolm just claimed to have built the moon. Malcolm nods once. "Yes, all of it." Laughter breaks like static. "Impressive," another man smirks, "considering you didn't exactly come from Stanford or MIT. A ripple of chuckles. Malcolm pauses. Not because he's unsure but because he's seen this performance before, the kind that hides behind polite smiles and coded compliments. He's the only black man in the room. The only one without a tie that costs a mortgage payment. And yet, he's the only one who truly understands the technology they're discussing. Richard clears his throat, pretending to steer things back to business. Well, Malcolm, we appreciate passion. But let's be realistic, we'll handle the scaling. Our infrastructure dwarfs yours. You focus on what you're good at, the technical stuff. Translation, stay in your place. Malcolm exhales slowly, glancing out the floor-to-ceiling window. New York stretches beneath him, a maze of ambition and arrogance. He thinks of how many times he's been told to stay in his place. The janitor in the lobby had nodded to him this morning like a brother in the trenches. Keep your head high, son, he'd said. They'll see you one day. But right now they didn't. Not even close. Tell me something, Richard adds casually. How long have you been with this company again? Malcolm smiles faintly. Since day one. Ah, loyal man. Good. We value that. They didn't understand what he meant. Day one wasn't when he was hired. It was when he built it, alone, broke, coding in an abandoned warehouse on the east side. They laughed again, oblivious. And Malcolm sat quietly, letting them bury themselves deeper in arrogance. Because the longer they talked, the more power shifted, not in volume but in silence. Cut to the flicker of a streetlight in Detroit. A boy crouches beside a broken computer pulled from a dumpster, wires spread like veins across the pavement. That boy is Malcolm. 13 years old. No money. No mentor. Just curiosity and an old motherboard that still hummed faintly when he touched it. He learned coding from discarded manuals, teaching himself loops and logic on public library computers. While other kids memorized lyrics, he memorized syntax. When teachers said, "People like you don't end up in Silicon Valley," he smiled and thought, then I'll build my own valley. At 22, he launched a startup from his mother's basement. Investors called it too ambitious. Banks called him too risky. One recruiter even said, "You're brilliant, Malcolm, but maybe lead with a different picture on your resume." He kept the picture. 4 years he built algorithms by day and fixed cars at night to pay for servers. When venture capitalists ghosted him, he found angel investors who didn't care about his skin color, just his code. 2 years later, his AI model predicted pandemic trends with 97% accuracy. The media never mentioned him. The articles called it a small research team in Michigan. But it was him. Always him. Now, a decade later, the same men who once ignored him want to buy his innovation. To slap their logo over his life's work. And they don't even know whose hands built it. The flashback fades. We're back in the boardroom. Malcolm's eyes flicker, memories dissolving into the cold light of the present. He straightens his jacket. No designer label, just clean, pressed, dignified. The same hands that once soldered wires in a garage now rest on a mahogany table worth more than that entire garage. And for the first time, the quiet isn't heavy. It's powerful. By noon, the deal looks done, at least on paper. Contracts slide across the table. Pens click. But beneath the surface, something sharp is forming. Richard leans forward, pointing at a clause. Once the merger's finalized, all intellectual property rights transfer to Hale Industries. Malcolm reads it. Then again. His voice remains even. That includes post-development iterations? Of course, Richard says, waving a hand. Standard procedure. We'll own improvements made under our umbrella. Another executive adds, "Don't worry, you'll still be credited as lead developer." Lead developer. Not founder. Not owner. Malcolm's chest tightens. He hears echoes of every meeting where a black innovator was told to hand over his brilliance in exchange for visibility. He looks around the table, 12 men all nodding, all convinced they're saviors. Then one jokes, "I mean, hey, at least you'll finally have a white CEO to get you into the big leagues." Laughter. Not the kind that fills a room but the kind that strips the air out of it. Malcolm doesn't laugh. He doesn't move. He simply closes the folder. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he says quietly. Richard smirks. "About what exactly?" Malcolm's tone doesn't change. "About ownership." The laughter dies. "What do you mean?" Malcolm's eyes lift, steady, precise. "You're proposing to buy my company. But according to this document, Hale Industries already lists Reed AI Systems as a subsidiary." The room freezes. "How would that be possible?" Richard snaps. "If we haven't signed yet?" Malcolm slides another document across the table. A certificate of incorporation, dated 2 years earlier. It bears his signature and one more. His silent business partner, Dr. Lydia Grant, head of corporate law. And beneath it, a notarized stamp. He leans back. Because 2 years ago, while you were outsourcing your ethics department, I was buying your patents. Silence. The electric. The men shift in their seats. For the first time all morning they look at him. Really look. Malcolm stands. His voice carries the calm of someone who no longer needs permission. You assumed I was your contractor, he says, pacing slowly. That's fine. Assumptions are a luxury the powerful often enjoy. But here's what you missed. Read AI isn't being acquired. He pauses. It's the parent company. Confusion ripples through the room. Richard's jaw tightens. That's impossible. Is it? Malcolm turns to the projector, clicks a remote. The slide changes to a web of subsidiaries and holding groups. Hale Industries sits at the bottom of the chain, under a quiet shell entity registered in Delaware, Reed Holdings LLC. I've spent the last decade building systems that detect hidden bias in algorithms, Malcolm continues. Turns out I learned how to detect it in business too. He looks each man in the eye. When you refused to partner with me 5 years ago, I invested quietly through minority funds and tech trusts. I let your greed do the rest. He gestures to the slide. You don't own this company, gentlemen. It's owned by every black coder, designer, and dreamer you ignored. Richard's face drains of color. This is extortion, he hisses. No, Malcolm replies, this is exposure. He clicks again. The screen shifts to leaked emails, their own, mocking diversity programs, calling them PR window dressing. One executive whispers, who leaked this? Malcolm meets his gaze. You did. You left your server unsecured. My system found it. A beat of silence. Then Malcolm walks to the window. The city stretches endlessly below. You wanted plain English, he says softly. Here it is. You tried to buy what you already serve. He turns. And as of this moment, every unethical clause in that contract is null. Effective immediately, Hale Industries is under review for discriminatory procurement practices. The sound of a phone vibrating shatters the quiet. It's Richards, his board's legal counsel, already calling. The empire is cracking. And the man they called the tech guy just pulled the first brick. 2 days later, the headlines explode. CEO caught in racist merger scandal, engineer turns tables. Black founder owns company that tried to erase him. Stock prices tumble. Investors flee. Hale Industries suspends operations pending investigation. Malcolm doesn't gloat. He sits in his modest office. Plants, sketches, a coffee mug that reads code like you mean it. Dr. Lydia Grant stands beside him. You did it, she says softly. He shakes his head. We did it. Because this was never just revenge. It was correction. The footage of the boardroom leaks online. Millions watch the moment Malcolm says, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Comment sections fill with fire emojis and thank yous. Some call him the Black Iron Man. Others call him a legend. But Malcolm doesn't see legend. He sees history. His father passed over for promotions, his mother correcting people who called her girl at the clinic, his own younger self fixing broken machines because people kept breaking him. He looks out the window as rain begins to fall. Soft, rhythmic, cleansing. Voiceover. Racism in the corporate world doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles across a table. But silence is a tool, and in the right hands, it can become thunder. Malcolm signs a new charter, one that funds black innovators and underrepresented founders. He calls it the Reed Initiative. His mission? Build systems that see people the first time. And in that quiet office, the story feels less like triumph and more like restoration. Because power isn't proved by how loudly you speak. It's shown by how deeply the world listens when you finally do. This wasn't just about one man. It's about every black professional told to wait your turn, every innovator whose ideas were borrowed, every voice mistaken for background noise. Malcolm Reed didn't shout. He showed the world that dignity is power disguised as silence. This story moved you? Share it. Comment what part hit hardest. And subscribe, because every week we tell stories like this. Stories that prove resilience isn't rare, it's revolutionary. Like, share, and subscribe, because these voices deserve to be heard and we're not done telling them.